second 2023 presentation of Reasons to Believe. It's great to see you all here. Thank you very much for coming out. Tonight, I have a special friend who I met about a year ago when I attended with some other friends the RTB chapter meeting down in Tampa, Florida. And my friend's name is Vince Rocca. Rocca, I'm sorry, I blew it. I asked him beforehand, how does he say it? It's Rocca. Even though it's R-O-C-C-A, kind of violates the rules of English. Double consonant would mean a short-sounding O, but who learns that anymore, right? But I'd like to, oops, I need you to refresh your phone. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Vince. There we go, thank you. So Vince was born and raised in Canada, and he's been here in Florida for 33 years. He married his lovely wife, Joy, right over here. Hi, Joy. And they have 3 kids and 2 grandchildren. Since moving to Florida, Vince has been a co-founder of 2 different high-tech companies, including his current company, which provides cybersecurity services to businesses globally. In 2005, his life was forever changed when he had a stroke of Jesus. I like how he worded that. And I asked him beforehand if he'd be willing to tell us a little bit about that story, and he agreed that he would, so thanks, appreciate that. While exercising, he tore an artery in his neck, which resulted in a fluke stroke that he miraculously survived without any lasting symptoms. This event kicked off a journey that brought him to accept Jesus 2 years later, and ever since, he has been teaching multiple Bible studies at his church and other organizations, including RTB Tampa chapter. 3 years serving at USF as the campus director for a Christian apologetics organization called Ratio Christi. And Ratio Christi is a global movement that equips university students and faculty to give historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus Christ. He and his wife currently teach a biblical marriage study class at their church, along with a 1-year-long deep Bible study of the first 5 books of the Bible. So if you would please help me welcome Vince Rocca to the stage.
So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gary, for that. Really appreciate that. And so, thank you for my phone. I appreciate that. Actually, let me give this back to you, all right, so that it doesn't distract me. So, thank you, everyone, for having me tonight. It's really an honor to be here. I've heard so much about this church, and it blows me away what you guys have done here. Really, really love this. And I said I would elaborate a little bit on what happened in 2005. And so, I was 39 years old, and I was thinking, okay, I need to get in shape. I'm starting to get a little flabby here. And so I started going, being Canadian, right? I had to go rollerblading. I had to skate, right? And so I was doing somewhere around, I think I was doing 8 miles and then 8 miles back. And I was pushing myself to the absolute max of my heart rate. And this biker comes up behind me, and I turned my neck like this, and I felt a sharp pain go through my neck. And I was like, wow, that was really weird. And didn't think much of it. About 8 hours later, the room just started spinning 1,000 miles an hour. My daughter has to call 911. They bring me to the hospital, they sedate me, and 3 days later, I wake up in the hospital with a neurologist in my room. He's got a picture of my brain that they took using something called an MRA, and you could see all the vessels in my brain, and there was a spot in my brain that was completely blanched. There were no vessels, right? And so for people that know me, it explains a lot, right? So but, thank God I had no effects when it happened. No motor skills were affected in any way. And a week later, I went home, but it made me think about my mortality. And so for 2 years, God was working on me, all right? And finally, I accepted Jesus, but, he was very gentle, all right? Well, kind of, except for the stroke, okay? But that's what I needed because I wasn't listening to things that he had been telling me in other ways. And so he gave me a good slap, and it was fantastic. It wasn't a stroke of genius, it was a stroke of Jesus. And so, best thing that ever happened to me. The world will say, all right, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, all right? And I'm like, no, it changed my life, all right? I wouldn't be standing here before you if it wasn't for that. So, and so enough about me, all right? We're here to talk about our topic tonight that you saw in the email that Gary sent out. And first of all, before I get started, the way I teach, all right, is I like it very much to be interactive, all right? And so if you've ever looked at how rabbis teach, like Jesus, he was called a rabbi 6 times, right? And so in a rabbinic environment, all right, the teacher teaches and the students just speak back, right? So, a lot of us think about the Sermon on the Mount, and they think, oh, Jesus basically stood behind a podium maybe, right? And the students, the disciples just sat there. No. Okay, as he's teaching, they're talking back and asking questions, right? So let's keep it very interactive. Stop me and ask questions. Oh, Art. What's that? Absolutely, I love that you're here. All right, I've missed you being. I'll take your questions any day. All right, I may say, hold that thought, we'll talk about it later, but definitely bring your questions, okay? And please don't be offended if I say, hey, that's too far of a tangent, all right? But our topic tonight, if I can get my thingy to work, okay, there it goes, all right, is about God, all right, and the Big Bang, right? But specifically, we're going to expand this thing, all right, to talk about 4 Big Bangs, all right? The Bible actually talks about 4 different Big Bangs, all right? And when properly understood and articulated, all right, these are things that atheists cannot refute. They cannot explain how the Bible, right, specifically Genesis, written 3,500 years ago, all right, could have known these things, right? And, the Bible's the only one that identifies these things, right? As far as being big bangs or major things that God brought into existence. So I like to ask questions also. So I know you guys know the answer to this one, but I'm still going to put it out there. What's the first big bang that you all know about? Creation, right? And so the creation of the universe, right? And so obviously, God did this, right? Because we all believe this. But what does the world think about creation? Where did it come from? The Big Bang, but specifically before the Big Bang, where did it come from? What do they specifically say that it came from? That's more of a Christian thing, right? So, but the world, if you ask an atheist, what was before the Big Bang, typically they'll say nothing, right? Now, for a Christian, should we accept that there's nothing before the Big Bang? No, there is everything. The infinite God, right, is what exists before the Big Bang, right? But when they say nothing, they're basically getting rid of God from the entire equation. And so we as Christians need to basically say, look, that point right there, let's see if I get my pointer to work, that point right there is God's power, right? His infinite power being manifest, right, in ways that only God can manifest because he's infinitely powerful. So I want to share with you some of the text, the biblical text that talks about this, all right, and make it a little bit more concrete. And so to be able to do that, right off the bat, we're going to learn some Hebrew together, all right? Did you expect to learn some Hebrew tonight? All right, how many people? Yeah? No? Oh, okay, you want? Okay, good. All right. So anybody here know Hebrew? A little bit? Okay, all right. Yeah, you've been exposed, okay. So what do most people think about Genesis chapter 1 as far as how God created things? Do most people think that God just magically poofed everything into existence? Yes? No? What's that? Bada, all right. But most people, like if you talk to most Christians or those that are outside of reasons to believe, all right, they think that God created everything just like a magician creates something or does something, like he just poofed it into existence, all right? But is that what the Bible actually says 100% of the time in Genesis, all right? Well, we know for sure, all right, at the creation of the universe, the Big Bang, that it was definitely a poof, all right? But elsewhere, was it or was it not? Well, first of all, let's talk about these four distinct verbs. And Chuck, you got the first one, right? Bara, all right? Everybody say bara. Bara, all right? Means absolute creation. It's what we would call that poof type of creation act. In the Bible, it's only used and it's only used for acts done by God, right? It's never used for anything done by individuals, and it's what the world would say is creation from nothing, all right? In other words, nothing natural, all right? In other words, God poofs something into existence, all right? And so the second verb, all right, is asa. Everybody? Asa, which means to do or make, all right? And in the Bible, it's used to describe actions done by God, right? But also done by people, right? It can be used in both situations. And it's all about taking existing materials, all right, and recasting the materials into something else. Great example would be baking a cake, right? You take in all these ingredients. The ingredients pre-exist. They don't have to be poofed into existence from nothing, all right? And you put them all together and you recast those raw materials into something new, right? So asa is different than bara in the fact that it is a recasting rather than that poof type situation. Now, the next one is haya. Everybody? Haya, which means to be or to become, right, in Hebrew. And it implies, in the Genesis 1 context, all right, allowing nature to run its course. So, for example, I've got this tree growing on the screen, all right? If you put a seed in the ground, right, and you fertilize it, all right, then what do? You just let natural processes take over, right? And it becomes something else. So that's one of the other verbs that's used in Genesis. And then the last one is yasar, okay, which means to form. And what it means is a potter, right, molding something. And it's only used once in the entire first chapter of Genesis. And it's when it says that God formed, yasar, Adam, from the dust of the ground. So in other words, all through creation, God is voicing, right? But when it came to man, he's hands-on, all right? And there's a beautiful picture there. And so that's the one time that that's used. All right, so now that we understand the four verbs, let's go to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. What do you think that word created is in Hebrew? Bara. All right, why? Only God did it, right? Power of God, right? But was there anything physical in existence before this moment? What does Jesus say about God to the woman at the well? God is spirit, right? He's not physical, all right? And so, plus he's infinite in every way. And so what did he have to do? He had to make everything that is physical that we take for granted every single day, atoms, elements, this building, all the raw materials, all right, he had to create. And at that moment in Genesis 1:1, right, the universe, all right, what we pictured in the Big Bang picture that I showed you earlier, came into existence. So the creation of the universe is a bara verb, right? And it's all physical items in this world that came into existence in a poof kind of situation. So again, Genesis 1:1, bara, all things physical and or natural. So everything that we're used to is created from nothing at that first point in time. Another way of looking at it is, in the beginning, God bara the heavens and the earth, all right? And we typically, as Christians, think about this verse where it says heavens and the earth. It's talking about, outer space, right? And the earth, the globe. Well, the heavens and the earth is a term that's used in Hebrew where it's a combined phrase, right, that's called a merism, right? And heavens and the earth means the totality of everything in Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, right, remember this Genesis was written at Mount Sinai, okay? Moses received Genesis through Deuteronomy at Mount Sinai from God on the mountain, is what tradition and history records, all right? And so there was no word for universe. And so how do you express the totality of everything? The heavens and the earth, all right? And so you'll see throughout Scripture that heavens and the earth is used in multiple places, and what it's describing is the totality of all physical things in the universe. One thing to look out for, just by the way, is sometimes you'll see it flipped, earth and the heavens, all right? And when you see that, it's telling you it's talking about something different, totally different topic. So again, represents the totality of everything physical created from nothing. In other words, time, energy, right? Space, the space that we're in, right? And matter, right? Came into existence. Because you think about it. If God is infinite in every single way, none of these things could exist, all right? Unless he brought them into existence, all right? And so all of these things, science teaches, right, that they came into existence at the moment of creation, all right? The start of the universe, the Big Bang, all right? And so all the atoms, the elements came into existence. And so if we look at a more detailed picture of the Big Bang, and we take the beginning of verse 1, in the beginning God created, all right? And we look at that point of creation, that moment of creation, all matter, energy, space, and time was created, right? And that word created is talking about that point in time. And everything that's in existence in this universe, time, space, energy, and matter all came into existence at that moment, all right? And it was confined to that one single point. Everything was concentrated. And then what did God do? He started to separate. He started to separate. What does the word holy mean? Separate, all right? So what is God doing? He's on a mission to make his creation holy, right? Set apart, right? All right, from things that are opposite of him, right? And so he starts separating things, all right? Because at first, what did you have? All right, the universe was so hot and so energized with pure energy, right? Atoms couldn't even form, right? You just had subatomic particles, right, that were racing out from that creation moment, all right, and moving out in time and moving out into space, all right, space that was expanding, all right, and it was forming the universe over a period of time. So in other words, everything that we understand as being natural, right, was concentrated in that one point, and eventually it's separated into our universe, which is the natural items of our universe. So anything outside of the universe is supernatural, all right? And so think about this. What has Hollywood done to most people and our kids, right, is they've convinced us that supernatural has to do with, you know, this creepy guy in a white mask or ghosts and any other thing that comes out of Hollywood, right? But what they've done is they've masked what is really supernatural, right, which is things that are outside of our universe, right? Things that are spiritual, right? And so the Big Bang, right, the universe had to come from something that was outside of nature because the universe is nature as in itself. It's natural, right? Does it make sense, everybody? All right? And so you have to remind atheists of this stuff too, right? Because they're going to say, oh, that's nothing. It's nothing before the universe, right? But no, that's our supernatural God. That is our infinite God. That is our God of infinite power. All right? Now, what's that? Okay. Now, I also mentioned this earlier that time started. Well, isn't it interesting that the Bible is the only holy book that talks about the fact that time came into existence, all right? In that very first chapter and very first verse, it says, in the beginning. Well, in the beginning of what? Well, God created the heavens and the earth. He created everything, right? And so time had a beginning. And there's multiple verses you can read throughout the Bible that talk about time coming into existence. But space came into existence, and if you think about it, all the energy of the universe came into existence at that particular moment in time. And is everybody familiar with E equals mc squared? What is it? All right, energy equals mass or matter times the speed of light squared, right? And at the moment of creation, all right, was the speed of light the speed of light? No. Was there any matter? The subatomic particles that would become matter were in existence, but it was basically pure energy for the most part at that exact moment, all right, of creation, right? And so everything was slanted to the E, all right? And if you think about this, this was an infinite amount of energy. You can't get your mind around how much energy is there, all right? And it's so much that you can't even conceive it, all right? And so we have to remind atheists, all right, that, hey, that amount of energy came into existence, right? And it wasn't just an out-of-control explosion, all right? Because if it was an out-of-control explosion, all right, we wouldn't be here. Because the universe has to be very, very finely tuned, all right? And the fact that there's so much energy, right, there points to something outside of creation bringing that amount of energy into existence. Well, what can bring an infinite amount of energy into existence except for an infinite being, all right, outside of creation, all right? And an infinite being outside of creation is not going to do it in an unordered way, all right? And so remind atheists, right, that our God in the Bible, he's infinite, and he's not limited by time. He's eternal. He's not limited by space. He's omnipresent. He's not limited by knowledge. He's omniscient, all right? And he's not limited by power. He's omnipotent. And so you think about this, all right? The Bible talks about God not being limited by time. Well, the Bible talks about time being brought into existence, all right? And we know from science it was brought into existence from something that was supernatural, all right? We know that space was brought into existence by something that was supernatural, and so on and so on. And so, you know, if you think about this, all right, atheists and the world in general is trying to discredit God, all right, by making it seem like the Big Bang is like an explosion, all right? If I threw a bomb in the back of this room, what would happen? You just get total chaos, right? All right? And would there be any way to control the impacts from that explosion, right? It should be just completely randomized, right? Is the universe completely randomized? Absolutely not, right? And so anyone who says that, oh, it's just a Big Bang explosion, right? What they're doing is they're trying to hide and discredit the power, the infinite power of God, all right? And you need to flip that around and say, look, all right, that was such an infinite amount of energy, all right, that it could have only come from something that had even more energy. And the other thing is, if you look at it, all right, it was incredibly ordered, right? Because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't incredibly ordered. All right, I can't read that. And so the universe, remember how I said it started expanding, right? And there was an expansion rate of the universe. And if that expansion rate was too fast, right, no stars or planets could form, right? And the reason why is, remember those subatomic particles, right? You know, if you remember your chemistry, you have protons, right? You have electrons and you have neutrons, right? Well, to get atoms, you have to have those particles, right, combine such that you have electrons rotating around protons, right? And, you know, you have one proton, one electron, you have hydrogen, right? And so on and so on. Well, there was so much energy for the first 400 million years of the universe that those subatomic particles could not form atoms, all right? But here's the thing, is if the universe was expanding too fast, right, atoms never would have formed, right? And if atoms never would have formed, could we be here? Could our planets be here, all right? And so it has to be a very, very controlled expansion rate. The other thing is, if it was too slow, right, what would happen is gravity would act on those subatomic particles, and they would all just, boom, clump back into each other, right? And you would have gotten, from the universe, you would have gotten just a big clump of subatomic particles lumped into something that would never bring planets or stars or anything else. So there had to be this perfect balance between how fast and how slow, all right? And it had to be razor, razor thin, all right, as far as that margin between too fast and too slow. And so the margin of error, all right, for this to be just right, is this number. It is 1 in 10 to the 54, all right? And so just so you can visualize this, all right, this is what it looks like. Right? How precise this has to be, right? We don't have names for numbers like this, all right? And so think about this. If it wasn't that precise, all right, as far as the balance between how fast and how slow, all right, we wouldn't be here. 54 zeros, all right? It's just an absolute incredible number. And so just to do a comparison, in North America, they've estimated the number of leaves are 1 to 10 to the 24th, all right? In the universe, they've estimated the total number of atoms are 10 to the 81st, all right? So somewhere between the number of leaves and atoms in the universe is the precision that the universe had to expand at, all right, for us to even exist, all right? And is that the byproduct of an explosion? Absolutely not. Cannot be, right? Because it was so precisely controlled. Now, that's not the only thing. The universe has got 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force. These all have to be balanced with each other, right? And we can go on a long time for this, but I'm just going to give you some simple things, all right? So the strong nuclear force has to be approximately 100 times stronger than electromagnetism, all right? Electromagnetism, all right, has to be approximately 10,000 times stronger than the weak nuclear force, all right? And then the weak nuclear force has to be 10,000 billion times stronger than gravity, all right? If those aren't perfectly balanced, all right, we're not here, all right, for a variety of number of reasons, all right? And again, those fundamental forces, all right, were put into effect the moment that this universe was created. God put those forces in place. The expansion rate, they were put in place. He just set them up and let them run, all right? And so they're so fine-tuned that they are not an explosion, all right? It cannot be an explosion because explosions don't produce this type of order and fine-tuning, all right? And so something I heard years ago kind of just summarizes everything that I just explained to you, all right, which is that if God is small enough to fit into this finite head, he's not big enough to be God, all right? And so we have to understand that everything that we see in the universe that looks infinite to us as human beings, it is proclaiming his glory, his infiniteness. And we cannot let atheists and the world try to cloud that and hide that and diminish that, all right? You notice one of the tactics that atheists will use all the time, right, is that they will try to make God finite. They will try to make him human, right? They will try and express him in less than godlike terms, right? And we have to combat that by keeping him on that pedestal of being infinite. All right. I'm not going to flip that thing around yet, but any questions?
It'll work.
Oh, yeah. Didn't it make sense, everybody? Art.
It does say that he created out of particles too small for us to see.
It does say that he created the universe, right? It doesn't use the word universe, but he created all things that are seen from that which is unseen, all right? In Hebrews, all right? And Psalm 19 basically says the heavens declare the glory of God, right? And so how do they declare? Well, you see his infiniteness in everything. These numbers are astronomical, all right? It took me 10 minutes to write all those zeros, right? Okay, how are we doing on time? All right, so, yes, sir.
So, if God, we know God is infinite, infinitely powerful, way beyond our even slightest comprehension, why does God have to use 13.5? Why can't he just create the whole universe in a day, like it says in the Bible? Why can't he just create the entire universe in a day? All the stars and everything else in one day?
Mhm.
Or 7 days, whatever. Why would he not do that?
Mhm.
If he's so infinitely powerful, which he
Sure,
is,
yes.
why does he have to use this 13.5 years? Why are you saying that when he says he created everything in a day or 7 days?
So I'm saying that because he basically, in the heavens, right, he created all this vastness so that it declares his glory, as it says in Psalm 19, right? And, if the heavens did not declare his glory, all right, and his infiniteness, all right, then, he wouldn't tell us to look towards that, all right? And so could he do it in a day, all right? Could he do it in, I always tell people, I said, if God wanted to, he could create the universe in 6 seconds and he could use Willy Wonka's Oompa Loompas to do it, right? But he chose to do it a certain way to reveal his glory. And to me, all right, I think about the verse in Romans chapter 1, where it says that no one has an excuse because the creation, right, reveals his glory. Well, what's his glory? His glory is his infiniteness. His glory is what we cannot comprehend. I'm even having a hard time explaining what his glory is, right? Because it's so immense. And so he does this to reveal it to us. But here's the thing, is he could have done it in a single day, but would the evidence that was revealed by doing it in a single day, all right, still give us free choice, free will, right? Because here's the thing, is if we're in the presence of God, the infinite God, all right, you're so overwhelmed, right, that there is no possibility that you can make a choice that is opposite of him, all right, when you're in his presence, all right? Especially, you think about his infinite glory, right? We as human beings would be overwhelmed, right? If angels are overwhelmed by it, right, how much more so will we be as being finite beings, right? And so God, right, in the universe, right, chose these things to put himself behind a curtain, for the lack of a better word, right, so that we can see him through creation, right? But it's not so much that we can't make a choice to not see him, all right? And so the fact that we've got free will, all right, is possible because he's concealed himself, all right, in creation, all right? And I know that's a really deep concept, but you asked a really deep question. It was really good. So, yes, sir.
I'm a little more shallow in my responses.
Oh,
Everything God does has a purpose. God is not a God of chaos. God is a God of order.
yes, sir.
All of his purpose reflects back onto him, so that's where the attention is. So everything in life has a season. So if you keep using all these analogies, it all goes back to the purpose. He had a purpose for doing it
Mm-hmm.
in the time frame that he described in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my shallow version as well. What the purpose is? The time frame was God created the heaven and the earth, and then next day he did this, next day he did this. Yeah.
Seventh day rest.
So there's a purpose behind each one of those sequences of time.
Folks, the real question is how long is a day? And it gets to the definition of the word yom and how yom is used in Genesis and ancient Hebrew. Most of the time, the word yom means anything other than a 24-hour period of time. The only time yom means a 24-hour period of time by the examples in the Bible are when they talk about the days of religious sacrifice and festivals, right? Like Yom Kippur, for example. We've all heard that, right? But if you would like to chat, I have a whole presentation on the ancient Hebrew of Genesis. I think your question is more young earth versus old universe, and I'd be thrilled to chat with you about that, maybe at lunch someday.
So, and actually I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment too. But again, God, he set it up so that we can make a free choice, free will choice, all right? And, why did he have to use, these numbers? There's a law. I showed you just like 5 items, right? There's so many other items that had to be perfectly fine-tuned for the universe to come into existence the way it is, all right? And to support life the way it's supporting life now. But let me move on. The second Big Bang that atheists have to account for. Anybody have any thoughts on what the next Big Bang would be? What's that? The appearance of life. Very good. All right. So, very good. The creation of life. Excellent. All right. Yeah. And so, creating life has been tried for decades now, all right? You can read all kinds of stuff about this, all right? They've been trying to create life from non-life, including in the movies, all right? They succeeded in the movies. That's about the only place, all right? But in real life, they really haven't. And if you notice, all right, in the story of the Exodus, right, in the 10 plagues, Moses and Aaron go into Pharaoh, right? And they turn water into blood. Pharaoh's magicians, were they able to duplicate it? What? Yeah, they were able to duplicate it, right? And Pharaoh basically said, whatever, right? So then Aaron and Moses brought frogs, right? Were Pharaoh's magicians able to duplicate it? Yeah, they were, all right? Then they get to the third plague, which is the plague is from the dust of the ground, all right? Gnats come to life, all right? And fill Egypt. Were the magicians able to duplicate that one? No, right? Because, and the magicians basically said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. We can't keep up with this. What was it? It was life from non-life. Only God has the ability to do that, right? And so, think about this, all right? And this is what you use this against atheists, because if you use the science to argue against them, because we talked about all matter, energy, space, and time being created at the beginning of the universe. And for all intents and purposes, at the point that the universe was created, there was no entropy. I'll explain entropy in a second, all right? And it was pure order at that point in time. It was pure energy, right? God's basically, his finger created that moment. But then, we know for a fact, right, that the universe is governed by the second law of thermodynamics, which means that everything in the universe moves towards disorder and decay, right? You leave something outside, what happens to it? It rusts, right? You don't take care of something, right? It moves towards decay, including, right? And so, it's interesting. All the forces of the universe, all right, are moving towards destruction, disorder, decay. And then, even the Bible confirms this by saying, look, the earth was formless, which is, that word was, is the verb haya that I showed you earlier. And what did haya mean? What's that? Become, right? And haya means to allow natural forces, right, to do their thing. Remember the plant, right? The tree? And so God, in Genesis 1:1, created the universe, and then he just allowed things to flow forward, right? And depending on the translation you look at, Genesis 1:2, the frame of reference switches from outside the universe, right? Everything's created, to being on the earth. And notice some of the translations will say the earth became formless, because haya can mean both was and became. And so think about this. The entire universe is moving towards decay, right? And let me finish this point, all right? It's all moving towards decay. And look at, this is what's called an interlinear Bible, all right? And you'll see Genesis 1:2, right? And I've chosen this word, hayah, right, to exist. So this is exactly what's in the original Hebrew, all right? And, oops, I didn't mean to do that, all right? And so what's going on here is everything is moving towards decay. And so if you come to this verse, Genesis 1:2, it says, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. All right? And so we read this, all right? And what does formless mean to you? What's that? No form, right? Is it like this? Was the earth like this, a lump of dough in Genesis 1:2? Right? Totally formless? Well, here's the problem, is formless is not a complete description of what's going on here, right? If we look at that word that's translated as without form, right? Literally in Hebrew, it means chaos. It means disorder, right? Right? And so the universe, right, was moving towards disorder, right? And when God started to move, all right, in creation on the earth was chaos. It was total disorder. Why? Because entropy had done its work, all right, through those many years, right? And so notice what it says. It's this word tohu. It means chaos, desolation, desert, right? A worthless thing, vanity, right? In other words, it's all chaos, right? And one of the things that you need to understand about the Bible, all right, is it's a very poor language as far as the number of words, all right? And so and in biblical Hebrew, there's no vowels, there's no capitalization, there's no punctuation marks, there's no bolding or anything. There's nothing to emphasize the text except for repetition, all right? And so God will repeat things multiple times in a short period of time to say, pay attention. It's almost like God would be saying, formless, 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 right? He's yelling at you, all right, when it repeats, right? And so notice, formless we just saw is chaos, emptiness. If something is empty, can it be ordered? No. So you've got a second. You got chaos there. You got a second chaos there. If this room all of a sudden became pitch dark, is there any order? No. So you got chaos. So three times, the Bible, the Bible basically just told you, all right, that the earth is chaos, disorder. It's entropy filled, all right? And so what you see is a description of moving towards chaos over those 13.7 billion years, where there's increasing entropy and disorder, right? And at approximately 10 billion years old is when we get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, right? And remember, this whole time it was all about hayah, right? It wasn't God doing anything, no miracles, no poof, right? He was just allowing natural processes. And so Genesis 1:2, the earth was, the earth became, all right? And what did it become? It was chaos, right? But it wasn't because God made it as chaos. At creation, right, he created everything, put it into motion, and allowed entropy to do its thing, right? And so that was all a setup for where I'm getting to right now. So we talked about creation of the universe, bara being a poof miracle, right? Now, would you say day one, light being separated from darkness, all right? Was that bara? Was that asa? Was that hayah? We'll leave yasar out of it. Let there be light, God said. All right? Would you say it was poof? It's actually hayah. Okay? In other words, allowed natural processes to do their thing. All right? And we could spend a whole hour just talking about the processes that happen there. So on day one, there was no bara. On day two, the waters above were separated from the waters below to create sky, basically atmosphere. All right? Was that bara, hayah, or asa? What's that? Hayah. All right? Natural processes again. All right? God just allowed it. These are the words that are in the Bible, by the way. And if you want to see it afterwards, I'll pull up the original Hebrew text and show it to you. All right? Day 3, dry land and vegetation. Haya, bara, asa. Haya. Okay, you guys are getting smart now. Very good. All right. So definitely haya. All right, day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Anybody disagree? It's haya. All right. So think about this. All of these things, are they made from physical stuff? Atoms. Yeah. Atoms, all right, the elements of the universe, the physical things that God created in Genesis 1:1 are all being reformed, right? Because there's also a saw in the middle of some of this stuff too, right? God's baking a cake, right? He's using existing stuff, right? Now we get to day 5, all right? So no bara, all right? Day 5, sea creatures and birds. Bara, haya, asa. Why bara?
Never existed before.
What's that?
They never existed before.
But are animals made of what? What are they made of? Matter. They're made of physical stuff. So why is it not asa? What is new that did not exist in creation before? Life. What kind of life? The Bible makes a distinction between different types of life. All right, breathing, yes, but on day 5, a specific type of life comes into existence. What's that? Organic, yes, okay, but organic is still stuff of physical, all right? Who has dogs and cats? All right, do you have more than one dog or cat? You have more than one dog or cat, all right? And so, do your dogs or cats, do they have personality? All right, are they soulish creatures? They have souls, all right? They have a mind, will, and emotion, right? They have personalities, right? And so a soul is the way you think, mind, right? The choices you make, and your emotions. I'll talk a little bit more about that here very shortly. And so animals, soulish animals like dogs, cats, etc., not cockroaches. They're straight from hell. I mean, all right, they have souls, right? And that's why you see a difference in their personalities, right? And so on day 5, it was bara, right? It was others too, but for 20 verses, right? Not until verse 21, right, in Genesis chapter 1, is there another poof by God. And the reason why is because up until this day, right, until those animals that have mind, will, and emotion, a soul, are created, right, everything's being recast, remade, because it's all physical stuff. But life, right, the mind, will, and emotion, not a mind like us as human beings, right? That's a whole other thing that we'll talk about shortly, all right? It's something that has to be created new, right? Because there's no materials in the universe that can make mind, will, and emotions, all right? Is that making sense, everybody? All right? So this was definitely a poof, all right? And so 20 verses between bara, poof, miracles. And so I'm going to take you to the verses to prove this, all right? So we have creation of life in Genesis 1:21. So God created, underlying word, bara, great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water and every sort of bird. Now, you see where it says living thing? The underlying Hebrew word is this word here. See, notice I've got it, Genesis 1:21, right? And I've clicked on this word nephesh, right? Which literally, in a most literal of translations, means soul, right? And let me bring up a different translation here, right? This is the same H5315, soul, living being in the blood, emotions, mind, will, character. And by the way, these are 2 of the most used dictionaries, Hebrew English dictionaries in the world. One is called the Strong's, the other one's the BDB, the Brown Driver Briggs. So I'm not pulling this out of thin air, right? The word nephesh means soul, right? And so, and notice Genesis 1:21, right? I'm clicking on this word soul, right? And it gets translated in most translations as life or living thing, but the underlying word is soul, all right? And so animals, all right, in the Bible are made as body, the physical stuff that was created on Genesis 1:1, and in verse 21, they were given a soul, all right? Their mind, will, and emotions, all right? And so think about this. Genesis 1:1, everything was created, bara, all right? All matter, energy, space, and time. And then day 5 is the next poof, all right? And in between, all that God has done is asa, he's reformulated existing materials, and haya, until the soul is created, all right? Everybody good on this? Make sense? Any questions on this? Too much to take in, all right? And so if you look at animals, their body and their soul, their nephesh, all right? And so think about this. Against entropy, against everything that's decaying, God basically brought life into being, right? And when life came into being, it wasn't something small, right? Which leads us to the third Big Bang that atheists have to account for. Anybody want to guess on that one? I gave you a clue. Yeah. What's that? Human. Nope. Hold on. Something else that has to be accounted for. What's that? No. Something else. It's related to life. Fish? No. What's that? No. Diversity of life. Okay? Because think about this. Life appeared on earth, right, in incredible abundance, right, and incredible diversity, right? And all of it was programmed, right, and put in place, right, and architected from DNA. From plants to animals to insects to fish, everything has its design embedded within DNA, all right? How did that much order and complexity, all right, in conjunction with all the order and complexity of our universe, come into existence that fast, all right? That's a Big Bang, all right? Evolution cannot explain that. Matter of fact, evolution, all right, doesn't move that fast, all right? It moved way too fast for atheists to be able to explain, all right? And so this is another example, all right, of God, all right, and his infinite knowledge, all right? How can you explain DNA being the blueprint for everything, for so many millions of species? So I'm going to show you 2 short videos. I hope will audio work if I play it through the computer? Yes. You will? Okay. All right, so there's 2 short videos that will give you a little bit of background on DNA, even though I know Dr. Woodward, did he go through a lot of stuff last month? Okay, well maybe this is a repeat, but it's only 2 minutes long. All right, so.
Stated Clearly presents, what is DNA and how does it work? DNA, also known as deoxyribonucleic acid, is a molecule. It's a bunch of atoms stuck together. In the case of DNA, these atoms combine to form the shape of a long, spiraling ladder, sort of like this one here. If you ever studied biology or saw the movie Jurassic Park, you probably heard that DNA acts as a blueprint or a recipe for a living thing. But how? How on earth can a mere molecule act as a blueprint for something as complex and wonderful as a tree, a dog, or a dinosaur? To help answer that question, let's first take a quick look at amino acids. Amino acids are tiny chemicals inside our bodies that are so important, they're often referred to as the building blocks of life. There's about 20 different kinds, each with their own unique shape. The neat thing about them is they can be attached to each other, kind of like Legos, to produce an endless variety of larger particles known as proteins. Amino acids make up proteins. Proteins, along with other chemicals, combine to form living cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. And organs, when they're all put together and functioning, of course, combine to form living creatures like you and me. These proteins that make up our bodies, and keep in mind, there's millions of different kinds of proteins. They each have to be formed in the perfect shape in order to function. If they're the wrong shape, they usually won't work. That's where DNA comes in. DNA does a lot of interesting things, some of which we don't fully understand, but one of its main and most well understood functions is to tell amino acids how to line up and form themselves into the perfect protein shapes. In theory, if the right proteins are built at the right time and in the right place, everything else from cells to organs to entire creatures will come out just fine.
All right, interesting. So you think about, all right, not only is there the diversity of life defined by DNA, but all the proteins associated with that have to be perfectly lined up, all right? And so how do they explain that, all right? And this is another about a minute long.
You've probably seen DNA represented like this, but it actually looks a little more like this. It's an incredibly long molecule that's precisely folded and tightly packaged in 46 chromosomes in our body's cells. How long exactly? Well, if you coiled all of the DNA in just one cell, it would stretch over 6 feet, and that's just in one cell. We don't know for sure, but recent studies have estimated the average adult body is made up of around 30 trillion cells. So if you lined up all of the DNA molecules in all of the cells of your body from end to end, they would reach 34 billion miles. Now, let's try to comprehend that distance. At their closest, the Earth and Pluto are 2.6 billion miles apart. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft, one of the fastest man-made objects of all time, travels around 1 million miles every day and still took almost 10 years to reach Pluto. Now take that distance and double it. Then double that. Then triple that. And you still haven't matched the length of all of the DNA that's tucked away in you right now, guiding your body's growth and repair.
So think about this, all right? This is another example of God's infinite power, right? Bringing incredible complexity and order to our physical bodies, right? And so atheists cannot account for that, right? And it's interesting, the Bible talks about this, right? In the fact that on day 5, right, life came into existence, right? And the diversity of life had to come into existence at that time. The Bible got it right. It got the universe instantaneously coming into existence. It got life coming into existence against what the universe is doing, which is moving towards disorder. And the diversity of life and the complexity of life and the fine-tuning of life is just absolutely incredible. All right, one more. The fourth Big Bang. What do you think that fourth one is? What's that? Man, okay. All right, very good, very good. All right, so this is day 6. So is this bara, haya, or asa? Okay, why do you say bara?
Because we can communicate with God, animals don't.
Okay,
They communicate with us, but they don't communicate with God. We communicate with God.
okay, very true. We do communicate with God, animals don't, all right? But if it's a bara action that is happening on the 6th day, right? What is coming into existence in creation, all right, that did not exist before? In other words, we know that all matter, physical, space, energy, time, right, came into existence, all right, on Genesis 1:1. We know on day 5, the soul, mind, will, and emotions came into existence. So now, on day 6, I heard it. Spirit, right? We are the only creatures that God made in His image, right? And the Spirit of God came in. Did the animals get the Spirit of God? No. So something new came in, right? And so what do you got? You got bara on the 6th day in describing the creation of human beings, right? Not the animals of the sixth day, but of human beings, right? And if I pull up the text, I could show you that, all right? And does the image of God make us special? Absolutely, in a lot of different ways, right? We're the only ones that you said can reason, right? And think and search for God, right? So if you lay out all the baras, all right, in Genesis, it's only 3, right? Only 3 times that God creates something using a poof type miracle. And so let's talk about human beings being created, all right? The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. Dust of the ground. Obviously, he formed the body. The material for his body. When was it created originally? Before day 1, actually. Genesis 1:1, when God created the universe, right? In the Big Bang, right, or the creation event, all matter, energy, space, and time came into existence. So the raw materials were in the universe for each and every one of us the moment that the universe was created, right? So dust of the ground. It's interesting. Well, I'm not going to go down that path. All right. And so then at the end of this verse, it says, and man became a living person. That's how it gets translated in this New Living Translation. Underlying word is nephesh. What did you learn a few minutes ago? Nephesh means literally soul. So do we as human beings have a mind, will, and emotion? Yes. Yeah. All right. So at our core, right, we are animals. All right. We are no different than the animals except for we're made in God's image, right? And so we have a soul just like the animals, but God breathed, right, the breath, and in Hebrew, the underlying word is neshama. It's a different word. It's rarely used in the Old Testament, right? He breathed the life in the breath of life, the neshama, into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person, all right, a soul, all right? And so the spirit, all right, is what elevates us above the animals. It's what makes us special and it makes us unique, right? That's the image of God inside of us. And so unlike the animals, we're made body, soul, spirit. And if you go look at the New Testament, Paul talks in 1 Thessalonians, and he says, may the God of peace make you holy in every way, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless until our Lord Jesus Christ comes again. So Paul, right, understood body, soul, spirit, right? Even in Hebrews, whoever the writer of Hebrews was, we don't really know for sure. But he even wrote this. He said, for the word of God, right, the word of God, all right, is alive and powerful. It's sharper than the sharpest two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow, physical, right? It exposes our innermost thoughts, right? And so you think about this, all right? The body, right, is the flesh. It's the thing that wants us to do things that are against God, right? Whereas the spirit inside of us, right, is the thing that wants us to do what God wants. It's basically what's called our conscience, right? But there are 2 things that are pulling us in either direction, right? And it says that the Word of God is able to discern, right, or divide between your fleshy desires and God's desires in the image of God that's within you, all right? And so if we contrast humans with animals, look, we share body, soul with them. We're just like them. But we have the neshama, the spirit. And if you go a little deeper, right, that's the divine breath. If you go a little deeper and look at each one of these individually, the body, depending on your Bible translation, is referred to as the flesh or the sinful nature, all right? It's our 5 senses. It's the things that, kind of drive us each and every day and how we interact with the world. Our soul in your Bible is referred to as your heart, right? So when it says that God wants your heart, he wants your mind, your will, and emotions, right? Are you thinking everything that's godly, right? Are you choosing everything that's godly, right? Your mind, will, and emotions. This is the essence of who you are as a person. It's what makes Buddy, Buddy, what makes Chuck, Chuck, etc. But then there's the spirit, right? And do we have a conscience? Right? Your dogs, right? Do they feel bad if they make the carpet dirty? Right? Naturally, or because they know how you're going to react? Right. Okay, they know how you're going to react, right? but they don't have a natural conscience, right? If they kill a lizard or your cat kills a lizard or something like that, they don't care, right? But, you know, they're proud to bring it home, right? But we as human beings, we naturally, all right, have a conscience with relation to certain things, right? That separates us from the animals. Fellowship, right? Chuck brought it up a few minutes ago, right? Where we as human beings, we want to know, we want to connect with God, right? Do your dogs on a Friday night sit on the corner and look up at the moon and say, I wonder if God is real? No, there's no connection there, right? What's that? What? They howl at the moon, exactly. They know he's real. They know yeah. And intuition. Now, here's the key thing. We as human beings, we're given creativity through the image of God, right? And so think about what human beings have done in a short time span that we've been here on Earth, right? We put a man on the moon. We've created computers. We created a building like this, right? We have vehicles, right? The James Webb Telescope, right? These are all byproducts of the image of God inside of us that makes us exceptional, right? Think about how long were the dinosaurs here on Earth? 256 million years? They were more powerful. They were bigger. They had incredible strength, right? Did they put a man on the moon? No. Right? Were they able to create the way we as human beings are? No. We, made in the image of the ultimate creator, are mini creators, all right? And we have a choice. Do we use that creativity to build God's kingdom here on earth, right? In our time here? Or do we use it to build our own kingdom, right? And so this creativity, all right, is something, right, that atheists can't explain, right? Because when human beings appeared on the earth, right, there was a big bang of creativity, right? And that creativity, with all the animals that had been on earth for millions of years, including the dinosaurs, all right, the only thing that they were driven by are natural, physical animal desires, right? Reproduction, migration, competitiveness, instinctiveness, right? It's all instinctive, right? Whereas human beings, we create music. How many animals have created music? No? How many animals have created art? Mathematics, technology, seeking God, speech and language. There's over 7 million animal species known in the world, right? But only human beings can reason and exert their will, right, on the world around them through things like art, music, technology, religion, right? And so atheists cannot explain the cultural Big Bang, right? The ability for human beings to create. The other thing they can't explain, right, is that human beings are the only ones endowed with the ability to speak and communicate in word, right? And communicate in such a way with words that they can convert it into symbolic thought, right? And by doing that, we're able to, do things that other animals can't do, and specifically, we can read God's word and connect with God through the image of God that's within us, right? And again, we can view things through symbolic thought, unlike animals, all right? Look at the perplexed look on their faces. I love that, all right? And so they cannot look at things from a symbolic perspective. And we as human beings, we can appreciate God's creation unlike them, right? And here's the other key thing, is unlike animals, we have an understanding of past, present, and future. Animals don't, right? And so, again, atheists cannot explain this, right? And so reasons to believe that atheists cannot explain the 4 Big Bangs, right? Creation of the universe. Only an infinite God could bring that much power and order and complexity and fine-tuning into creation, all right? The creation of life, which is totally against everything that we know about the universe, moving towards disorder, right? The diversity of life, right? And the fact that, it's so diverse and so complex, right? And it came into existence instantaneously. Evolution can't explain that. And they can't explain human creativity and reason, right? And bottom line, through all this, our God reigns, all right? Amen. Amen. right? And so I want to say thank you for letting me come and speak to you. I finished a little bit early. So question, all right? Can I ask a question? Yeah. So, day one, God separated light from darkness. All right? Just a bonus. If light was separated from darkness, that means light was part of darkness before, right? How's that possible?
Photons haven't developed yet.
Ah, very good. Excellent. What's that? 10 points, exactly. If I had a snack, I'd throw it to you.
Gary told me.
What's that?
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I came to one of your meetings a long time ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And then we had lunch at Chick-fil-A or Steak and
Oh, Steak and Shake with Carl.
And that lady said on the way in, we were talking about it took so long for the universe to cool so that photons could first develop.
Yes. So let me explain for everybody else. So at the Big Bang, right, the universe is so hot that atoms can't form, right? You can't have electrons orbiting around protons, right, to form atoms. Well, light as we know it comes from electrons jumping between different bands, right? That's the easiest way for me to explain it, all right, in atoms that have multiple bands of electrons, all right? But if electrons can't bond with protons to form atoms, you can't have light. So for the first 400 million years approximately of the universe, it was dark. But the substance, the material that was needed, okay, for light to exist was still in that soup, all right, that God had originally made. That's probably a bad word, but to use soup, all right? And so then it basically finally cooled enough, right, so that electrons could bond, and we have the first light coming out of the darkness, being separated from the darkness because it was part of the darkness. So, what's that?
I like that.
Okay. And so day one has got multiple meanings, right? And the rabbis, the rabbis must have gotten revelation from God because about 1,000 years after Jesus, they wrote down, right, this exact thing, right, where they basically talked about how in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, right, not only is it talking about the earth, but it's talking about before the earth even existed. They wrote it all down, and we're just like, where did they get this stuff? Except for, so.
You hear a lot about black holes.
Yeah.
With the Webb telescope.
Yes.
I guess it's pretty powerful bad boys, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Just they're going to absorb all the energy in the cosmos.
Yeah, I mean, gravity is so strong, right, that they just pull in everything, all right, that is everything that's around them, including light, right? So strong.
Light now. What do you mean by light? Oh, light. I'm sorry.
Light, I'm sorry, light. Yeah. You know, light is the fastest thing, right? And so light can't even escape because the gravitational pull is so strong. So.
UFOs. Your take on UFOs?
Yeah, don't open that can of worms. Right. So, Hugh Ross has got a book, okay, Little Green Men and Lights in the Sky. Phenomenal book, all right, on that whole topic. All right, you cannot do justice to that topic in just a couple minutes. All right, go read that book. It is well worth, and you should read it like 4 or 5 times. It's so good. Yeah.
A lot of times you'll get a question, how do you know that you weren't there?
Yes.
And really, people don't realize now, with all the science that we have all the evidence that we could look at and see what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't say, especially in cosmology and astronomy, you're not there because we can go back in the time.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with such phenomenal information that we have,
Yes.
look at the evidence and see that the Bible is correct. Everything that happens.
Well, and the thing is, and the Bible tells us the heavens declare the glory of God, right? Romans says you can see God's glory, right? And so, you know, he's telling us, look, right? And he's obviously given us the ability to look with the image of God that's inside of us, right? So it would be disingenuous for him to...
It also, you didn't mention, but it also tells you about the expansion.
Yes.
well, way before Einstein.
Yes.
All of you.
11 times, yes.
So
So, question?
I'm confused because something perplexes me.
Sure.
Is you mentioned to a couple different things about the knowledge of those who wrote this stuff down the first time, with the pharaohs, sorcerers doing all their magic. So
Yeah.
there seems to be a lot of in-depth knowledge throughout history, but very little of it recorded and shared continually like the Bible has. My question is all that knowledge was there way back then how come there's not multiple sources showing us that proof of all that knowledge?
So
You understand my question?
the only part that's confusing to me is which knowledge are you referring to, the Bible itself, or
no, I'm talking about
the universe?
The universal knowledge of the frogs, how to duplicate that scenario, the water to blood, the separating the light from the darkness, all this knowledge that we're talking about today, with all the resources we have, how come all these different civilizations didn't share that knowledge in a method or some kind of substance so that we can duplicate?
So,
Because you're going back to the original Hebrew in order to justify the knowledge that you're espousing. My question is Hebrew is only one language, so what about all these other sources of knowledge? How come it didn't get shared the same way?
well, first of all, God chose to share the knowledge of the creation with Moses on Mount Sinai, right? And he spoke, if you go read it very, very closely, it's not like the movie, all right? In Exodus chapter 20, it says God spoke to the people. So he spoke to 2 million people, right? And Moses was up on the mountain with him, and he brought it down. And so there were 2 million people there that experienced everything. And so here's the thing, is God chose the Israelites, the Hebrews, not because they're special, he says in Deuteronomy, but because they're not special, right? It's the most unlikely people, right? They're the weakest people, he says, right? To reveal who he is, right? And so unlike any other faith out there, right, Judeo-Christianity, right, can claim that God revealed himself to 2 million people simultaneously, all right, and spoke to them, right, because they basically begged Moses not to let God speak to them anymore because they would die if they heard God speak anymore, right? So 2 million people heard God speak and come down on the mountain. There's no other faith that can make that claim, all right? Islam, Muhammad heard from an angel, right? And he even questioned it until his wife gave him a hard time, right? Mormonism, Joseph Smith heard from an angel, right? And the list goes on and on and on and on, all right? So, and we have an unbroken chain, right, of Jews from Egypt that have celebrated Passover every year, all right, as God told them to, all right? And so there is an unbroken chain, and they've been hunted down, right? 88 times, I think it is, since Jesus have they been expelled from countries, but they still survive, and many kingdoms have disappeared, all right? And so God chose them to reveal, all right? Now, the science, we're only figuring this out in the past 30 years. To a Jew, all right, they say time began, all right, when Adam was created, all right? All right, time as we know it as human beings. Before that, God was the only one who was in existence. That's his time, right? And they don't concern themselves whatsoever, right, with figuring that out, all right? What they concern themselves with is the tabernacle and the temple, all right? Because God spent 51 chapters describing how to live a holy life, all right, by using the tabernacle, all right? And so that's what's important to God, that we live holy lives, all right? Doesn't mean that creation is not important. It is important, all right, because we have to be able to communicate with the world, right? But we have to recognize that, to the Hebrews back then, it wasn't important to God, right? It was more important that he taught them how to live holy lives, right? And so we should keep that in mind. So,
One more source of knowledge, in addition to Genesis, right on through, is the book of Job existed prior to Moses on Mount Sinai. And there's so much about creation consistent with the same message in Genesis, but it's also a lot different details.
Yes.
And I think that that's pretty important. So I love Hidden Answers in the book of Job. That's just an awesome.
It's a great book also. From a Jewish perspective, Psalm 104, all right?
I brought that up because of the question about other sources of knowledge, and just pointing out that prior, I don't know how long, he was in the patriarchal period, I guess, but so he's 400 years or so before Moses, and yet he's writing about creation. And there's actually more creation information in Job than in Genesis, by far, by far.
By the way, every minister I've given that book to, never did that. I don't want to break the chain. No, every minister I've given that book to has come up with, I can't believe there's so much information in the book of Job that I don't know. I've read it 10 times. But the book that Hugh wrote with all that information in it, they say there's things in there they never knew. And I think you read it the same way.
And I think your name is still in one of my books.
All right. So,
One of the many that
Buddy's
never
been waiting
came
up
back.
here. Hey, Gary, Buddy's. Oh. Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead, and then we'll
Well,
get
I
Buddy
just
next.
wanted to comment about the other sources of knowledge. One of the things they talk about is that there is a flood myth in almost every culture on planet Earth. It's just that the Bible gives us the real inside scoop. And the same goes with the Ten Commandments. The Code of Hammurabi is very similar, it runs parallel, but we have the royal and inspired version.
Amen.
No, I don't need that.
You do.
So everybody else
Really?
sees.
No, thank you very much. I'll skip the song. One of our RTB sessions, we talked about dimensions, the 4 dimensions.
Yes.
And I think one of the time we talked about there are at least 10 dimensions that they know of.
Yeah. Quantum physics basically, the math basically tells us that there's 10 or possibly 11.
That's amazing. Do you think when you die, your soul and spirit go into one of those dimensions, into paradise? Or is there a separate?
We'll ask Jesus together. So Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise, okay? And Paul says, to be absent the body is to be with the Lord.
That's outside the universe.
That's outside. That, because again, our soul, is it natural or
Spiritual.
spiritual,
Yeah.
right? And so it has to go to a place that,
That's not sin.
what's that?
It's sinless.
Sinless, definitely.
sinless.
Yes, because it's in the presence of the Lord, right?
So that would be outside this known universe.
Yes.
Just like
Right.
that.
Because what happened at the fall, right? God said, the earth is cursed
Right.
because of you, right? And what happened to God's presence in the garden? It had to
Pull away.
right?
Right.
And had to be concealed, right? And what's God working towards, right? He's working towards a new heavens and a new earth at the end where his presence will no longer be concealed, right? And it says at the end of the book of Revelation that there'll be no sun, no moon, and stars. Why? Because God's presence
He's the light.
is the light, right? In other words, it goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier. We'll be in the presence of God, right? And when you're in the presence of God, there is no other choice, right? Because he's everything beyond our abilities. Yes?
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. You don't have to run. No.
So one of the things that I follow in like natural, when scientists, is the more ancient the culture, the more sophisticated the knowledge the culture had, which destroys evolution. Right?
Yeah.
So even
Yeah.
secular scientists will say, how can I have an ancient culture before this culture that is much more sophisticated? The pre-flood or whatever, knowledge
Yeah.
was tremendous, huge amount of knowledge that we have lost. 90% of that knowledge, even secular scientists are acknowledging that they don't understand why.
Right.
But we understand why, but they don't.
So you think about, the world talks about evolution in the fact that the next generation is better and better and better, right? But from a Jewish perspective, a Hebrew perspective, they lift up their elders, not because they're better, but because they were closer to God in the garden, right? And so they value their elders because they're closer to God.
I find it very interesting that everybody says the Egyptians created the pyramids. The Egyptians themselves say they did not. That was long before they were there.
Right.
The Egyptians will not acknowledge that they said, we didn't do that.
Yeah. So if you want to understand, well, I'm not going to go there. I could go off on the whole Egyptian thing. So
Just my speculation about what has been said, I'm thinking of the Tower of Babel, where people used language to bring them together, and God said, no, you cannot do this, you cannot, have a monopoly, if you will. So just speculating then, why not the same with information? Because we, as mankind, we have the tendency that so much information makes us puff ourselves up into thinking that we don't need God, that we can be God. And so if this information is hidden and separated, then first of all, there's no reason for faith. There's no need for faith. But then second of all, it keeps us humble and in need of the reality of knowing who God is and that we are not.
well said. And really, it piggybacks on what's said in the Word, which is, if you seek God, He will reveal more, right? And so, in this fallen world, He's concealed and hidden, but He's still, hopefully you saw some evidence tonight that He's revealed Himself if you want to look, right? Well, the Bible is the same thing, right? I mean, I shared with you some things tonight, but the more you dig in here, especially from a Hebrew perspective, in the original languages, all right, things come to life in ways that you can't imagine. And so the information is there in that book, all right? The problem is most of us, and I'm not judging you guys, please don't take it this way, but most people will read the Bible as if it's a single story ranch home or a college textbook, right? They're looking for the information, right? And what they don't realize is that the Bible is a skyscraper, right? Many, many, many floors, right? And you have to build it one floor at a time. If you're trying to go to the penthouse, right, without building the floors before, what happens? You get chaos, right? And so I have people come to me all the time and ask me about the book of Revelation, right? And the first thing I'll say to them, have you studied Genesis in a Hebrew context, in a Jewish context, all right, and understood the foundation, all right? And if you've done that, have you done Exodus, all right? And have you understood the Egyptian culture? Because if you haven't, you can't understand the depth of Exodus, all right? Because, for example, all the plagues in the book of Exodus, all 10 of them, they're repeated exactly the same in the book of Revelation, all right? If you read it from a Hebrew perspective, right? John was a Hebrew. He didn't write Greek, all right? So what you'll see is the exact 10 plagues are there, right? So what happened in Exodus is a foreshadowing that will happen again in the future, all right? And the book of Revelation, the more you understand Exodus and Genesis, the more you can understand Revelation, all right? Mind-blowing stuff, but that's a simple thing. You go there, you'll see that there's frogs. You'll see that there's locusts. You'll see that there's water turning to blood, all right? One after the other, they're all there, all right? So, I'm sorry, it's 8:03 and we went over.
We're good.
So, the question is, spirits in paradise, are they talking to each other? So Jesus in Luke 16 gives us a parable, kind of, all right? It's not really in the format of a typical parable, right? Where he talks about the rich man and Lazarus, right? And Lazarus was poor, sitting at his gates, right? The dogs would lick his sores, right? And the rich man lived in opulence. They both die, right? And it says angels escorted Lazarus, not the rich man, angels escorted Lazarus to paradise, all right? And then the rich man basically can see Abraham, all right? And that's a whole discussion in itself. And he can see Lazarus, and he starts talking to Abraham, all right? And says, Father Abraham, have Lazarus dip his finger, right? And then he's concerned about his brothers, right? Right? Go tell, all right? And what does Abraham tell him? He says, you have You have Moses and the prophets. In other words, you have the Bible that existed at the time, the Old Testament, all right? And he says, no, if somebody rises from the dead, my brothers will believe, right? And what does Abraham say? No, right? Even if somebody rises from the dead, if they don't believe this, they're not going to believe that, right? And so the whole point is there's communication back and forth. It's interesting, though, that Lazarus doesn't communicate back. It's only the rich man communicating in that direction, right? So they're communicating. Book of Revelation, chapter 6, it talks about souls underneath an altar, right? And they're crying out and they're saying, how long, God, before you avenge our blood? So it's like they're familiar, they're experiencing the passage of time, right? Because they're saying, how long, right? And they want revenge, right? So I was like, wait, didn't they read Paul where it said, don't take revenge, let God, right? That's a whole nother discussion. So, all right? All right. What's that? We're going to be in the presence of the Lord, right? That's what you need to worry about, all right? So let me ask you, I'm going to finish with this, all right? If you get to heaven, if you get to paradise, all right, and it's beyond your wildest dreams, you didn't conceive how great it is, all right, and Jesus isn't there, will you still be happy? All right? Well, that's why the focus is on him, right, not on what we get, right? But most people are so worried about heaven as a place rather than him, who we... Right. Yeah, I'm going to see those streets of gold. Well, it's not about that. Gold's not going to do you any good in heaven. Right? So, all right, sorry.
Are there any other questions? No? Would you all join me in thanking Vince Rocca for coming and talking with us this evening? Thank you, Vince.
No, thank you.
Appreciate you so much.
I was honored. Thank you.
All right, folks, so that concludes this week's meeting, or this month's meeting, I should say. And next month, I'm going to present on what everybody should understand about artificial intelligence. This is a big deal, and I hope you all come back and bring friends. So thanks very much for coming tonight, folks. Appreciate it.